Hi everyone, I'm Mara Webster from SAG-AFTRA Foundation, and thank you for tuning into another one of our conversations at home. I want to continue reminding everyone watching that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation is a nonprofit that's continuing to raise funds for our COVID-19 Emergency Assistance Fund, which is currently working to support SAG-AFTRA members who are out of work due to all closed film and television productions. So please check out the details below this video and consider supporting if you're able to in any way. Today, we're incredibly fortunate to be joined by Sturgess, who's currently starring in Apple TV's Home After Dark. And I wanted to just kind of start by asking about your day-to-day. You're just saying that you went out to film season 2, and I believe you guys filmed the first couple of episodes and you've been stuck in Canada ever since.
Yeah, so we came sort of thinking we were going to be here for 6 months, which is how long it sort of took last year to shoot the first sort of 10 episodes. I think we got about 3 episodes in. We were just about to start the 4th episode. And then, you know, the whole production kind of got shut down. We were in the middle of a scene. I remember that. Me and Brooklyn Prince, who plays my younger daughter in the show, were just about to shoot a scene. And then sort of somebody came onto the set and told everyone that we had to go home and that we had 2 weeks to sort of figure out what was going to happen next. And we've kind of been sat here hanging out ever since.
You'll be hopefully not be a Canadian resident by the time this ends. Hopefully.
Well, yeah, it could be likely. It's possibly, it's on the cards. Yeah, no, I feel sort of fortunate. It's quite weird being away from home, you know, in a situation like this. You know, sort of home comforts are something that you definitely gravitate towards. But it feels it feels interesting, sort of being in a whole other country and having a whole different life out here. So yeah, it's a sort of mixed bag of emotions, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm just glad that you're somewhere safe where you can hibernate.
Canada is definitely one of the places you want to be in a situation. You know, it's very, very beautiful here, so I feel very lucky.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to jump in by asking you a little bit about the show. You're talking about how, you know, in the past you felt like your career jumped around a little bit more genre-wise, and you were like, oh, I'd love to do this type of genre and that type of genre, but that you've recently kind of gravitated a little bit more towards characters specifically. And so I was curious what specifically with the character of Matt in this show it was that you felt you were going to get to explore that you really hadn't gotten to do in previous roles and previous projects.
Yeah, I think before I was just so kind of desperate to sort of try anything that was different, you know, and I didn't really sort of focus as much on the project itself and who was behind it and who was the director and who were the showrunners and what, you know, I was just like, oh, great, this feels like a really exciting new thing to sort of be involved in. And when something like this came along, I just thought it was really, really, really well written more than anything. And I thought that they captured a sort of family dynamic just so sort of brilliantly, and that everybody had a lot of things to bring to the show. And yeah, I just remember just feeling really excited to sort of work with Brooklyn Prince, who plays my younger daughter in the show. And I just thought it was something, you know, I'd never played a sort of family in a show before, and it felt like that was a really interesting way of sort of breaching the sort of family dynamic and sort of getting involved in that with so much other stuff sort of going on underneath that what appears to be a sort of very sort of well-connected and functional family. There's a lot of sort of hidden secrets and sort of, yeah, it was, I think I was always nervous about playing just a dad in a TV show. And I think I wanted to make sure that whoever was the dad had a lot of stuff going on for himself personally. So I felt that ticked a lot of the boxes for this, definitely.
I feel like he's definitely got a lot going on in this. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about when you first got those 2 scripts and that, you know, that really grabbed you and you flew out to LA and first met with Brooklyn, who plays your daughter in the show that you were just mentioning. I heard that you guys did a lot of workshops together and some improv, and was just kind of curious about what that looked like and if it was scenes from the scripts that you were working on or if it was just more general character work that the 2 of you began by doing together.
Yeah, there was a lot of games. You know, we sort of, John Chu, who directed the first 2 episodes, was brilliant at just sort of getting us together, getting us in a room. I think we were both nervous. I was probably a bit more nervous than she was. Yeah, Brooklyn had already got the part, so I was sort of the one that was under the microscope for that kind of moment. And they were very keen to sort of find somebody that would sort of connect with Brooklyn and be able to sort of bring that dynamic to the forefront of the story. So yeah, there was a lot of games, there was a lot of sort of playing around, a lot of silliness. We sort of made up handshakes that went on for about 25 minutes. We sort of made up dance routines. I was teaching her to speak in an English accent at one point. We had to tell each other stories about our families and just loads of sort of improvisation stuff. And we sort of did everything. And then we did some work on the script and we sort of acted out a couple of scenes. Then we did some improvisations in character and just sort of different ways of sort of, for them to sort of see if it was going to work on screen, you know.
Yeah, and was that same part of the process when John Chu also gave you the presentation of where he saw the show going visually and what those elements would look like, and I was also just curious about how those elements really helped you in terms of preparing your character, knowing what the show was going to look and feel like overall.
Yeah, it was crazy because they said, would I fly out to Los Angeles and sort of meet with everybody? So I really just had the one day to kind of get bombarded by all this sort of information. And I met with John Chu first, and Dana Fox and Daryl Resnick, who were the showrunners. And they were just so full of sort of enthusiasm and such a great kind of energy for what they wanted to sort of achieve. So I think I spoke to John first, and so I had a much clearer understanding of what he was sort of trying to create with the show and what they were sort of really reaching for. And that happened before I met Brooklyn. So I sort of chatted with those guys for an hour or so. John showed me this amazing lookbook that he'd had. So I really kind of understood then kind of that it was going to be something quite cinematic and quite an exciting visual palette, as well as being a great story, you know. And then they said, yeah, we'd love you to meet Brooklyn. So then she was kind of presented to me. The doors opened and smoke rose from the floor, and she kind of came into the room. And and then it went from there really. And we just all sort of spent a lot of time together before I had to fly quickly back to London the next day. So it was a whirlwind trip.
Yeah, and given that you were touching upon kind of what that creativity felt like in that first meeting, how did that then translate once you were actually on set with all of them and you were filming, and the way that they would kind of create an environment and a space that was really conducive for you and the rest of the cast?
I think that was it. I mean, I think when you're working with young people, it's so paramount that you create the world and give them something to react to. You know, that it's all about that, you know, and that's why I sort of really enjoyed working with the younger people on the show. And I think everybody did. It brought like a really vibrant energy to the whole crew and all the cast and everybody involved. And it was about that. It was about sort of making sure that we sort of created an environment where they could sort of lose themselves in the story and the characters. What was the question again? I can't.
Well, that, and then also just kind of in working, you know, with John and the other show directors and the showrunners, and how they would work with you collaboratively and create that space.
Yeah, there was a lot of freedom for a television show and an episodic TV show where story and, you know, you're making sure you're weaving the story throughout all the episodes, and that, you know, it's quite a well sort of constructed, you know, thing that's put together. But they were so encouraging of giving us a lot of space to sort of be a family and sort of create that dynamic and get that sort of frenetic, kinetic craziness of any sort of family dynamic. So it was quite loose. I was very surprised at how much they let us sort of play around and enjoyed when things happened and mistakes happened. And, you know, especially those big sort of breakfast scenes that we had in the morning sometimes, where you had sort of the whole family together, and there's a million things sort of going on all at once. And they really encouraged us to just sort of play around with that and just sort of bring that to life as much as possible.
Was there a difference in terms of the way that set was for you and the rest of the cast, and particularly with scenes like that, between when you were filming and the way that you would all just kind of live in the environment a little bit more and just hang out and build that rapport naturally off camera as well?
Yeah, well, the great thing is that we had this amazing house that they kind of built at the soundstage, and it's such a great environment just to sort of spend time and just be, you know, and we would all just be sitting in the kitchen when they were setting up shots in other rooms, and we would just be hanging out, you know, and it felt like we were kind of a real family in a real house. So the sort of the lines started to blur quite nicely and quite organically, and as we became more familiar with each other, and we became sort of closer and closer as the sort of season went on. So yeah, it sort of felt like the house really became our sort of home. It became everyone's home, the whole crew and cast. We felt very sort of comfortable in there. So, you know, you'd find us all sort of playing cards or just drinking tea or just eating some sandwiches or something in the kitchen or, you know, upstairs, whatever. Just, you know, it became a very necessary sort of, you know, environment for us all to sort of inhabit at that time.
Yeah, and they designed that house so well, and there's so many tiny details in it. Did you find that just being in that physical space helped you to figure out some of the details and aspects of your character and who he would have been when he was younger? Yeah,
definitely, because I mean, you go into different rooms, and even as we were filming, they kind of changed the set to make it feel more lived in as we started to feel more and more at home in the house, you know. And you would find all kinds of new little treats to sort of find in the house that, you know, maybe even a drawing that one of the kids had done one day and they put it up on the fridge, or some new photographs turned up on the fridge, or, you know, they put a framed picture in the bedroom one day that wasn't there before. And, you know, they really sort of built memories and made sure that, you know, the house felt alive, you know, as these people sort of live and inhabit it. But then, yeah, you know, when I sort of first came into the house, there were photographs, childhood photographs of the characters that they'd already created, you know, which was amazing to see, you know, and pictures of me as a young boy superimposed with pictures of Reed Birney, who plays my dad, and we're sort of out fishing or something like that. You know, so yeah, and that always amazes me when you're on a film set, the detail that they sort of put into creating the world for you to just sort of inhabit and live in.
Yeah, and character-wise, there's always something really interesting about the way that people behave when they go back home, because it almost causes some sort of regression in you to who you were when you were last in that space. And I was curious about how you thought about that in terms of your character and the way that you wanted to play those elements on screen.
Yeah, I mean, I connected with that very deeply, actually. That was one of the sort of major draws for me to sort of understand the character. Because, yeah, I really know what I think everybody does to a certain level of what it's like to go home, and the sort of ghosts of your past and the memories of your past, good and bad, you know, all just kind of come to the surface anytime I go back home to see my mum and dad, who still live in the town where I kind of grew up. And, yeah, even just sort of walking the dog, or all these memories just kind of come flooding back, you know. And that was definitely a real in for me, and a real way of sort of understanding what the character's going through. Because if that memory, as my character is in the show, is so traumatic and so painful to kind of revisit what that would feel like, and how intense and sort of suffocating that would feel, you know.
Yeah, and I loved that part of your process with the showrunners and with the creative team was that you asked them to tell you things that were really important to your character, but you didn't necessarily need all the details, which you never have in television. But it was like if something was going to affect your performance, that you needed to intersperse in the lead up or be a huge curveball for him. And I was interested in if that's something that you often like to do in terms of learning details along with your character, or if that was specific to this and the ways in which that was a really helpful tool for you.
I think this is one of the first times I've been in something that's sort of episodic that may continue. You know, I've been in sort of television things that was sort of mini-series, and then sort of feature films which have a very specific beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, so it's really the first time that you're kind of learning, and you're part of the process along with the writers, you know, and I really enjoyed that. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, you know, but yeah, I was very adamant that I knew from the writers and from the showrunners anything that might be a sort of hidden secret or something that might play itself later on in the show. But yeah, it was a new experience for me, definitely, to sort of, you know, be along for the ride with the audience and with the rest of the cast, and sort of learning things as you would in real life as it kind of comes at you, you know.
Was it also a new experience in terms of forging relationships with multiple different directors? And obviously, you had the benefit of John doing the first two to really set the tone, but there's multiple directors obviously throughout the season. And how did you kind of navigate just forming a really instant relationship and understanding each director's individual working style?
Yeah, I struggle with that a little bit. I get very attached to people, you know, and then when they suddenly leave, I'm like, no, where have you gone? You know, and especially with directors who are the sort of leaders of the set at that time. But yeah, fortunately, I'd had a bit of experience with other TV things that I'd done where that was the same dynamic, you know, that they didn't have the same director all the way through. But I always struggle. I always have to sort of restart again when a new director comes in. But everyone is so sort of, you know, making sure that the director themselves, because you've got to think of it from their point of view as well. They're coming into a whole new environment and a family dynamic as well that feels very kind of grounded and rooted, and they're kind of coming at it as the new person in the room, you know. So really it was about us as a cast making sure that the directors felt sort of loved and able to sort of, we could bring them in, you know. But I find that very difficult, because I do, as I said, I get very attached to people.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to dive into your research for this a little bit, because I know that you were kind of reading books and articles from people who'd you know, been in the position of losing a family member in this way. And I was curious, you know, obviously everybody's story is drastically different, but what the connective threads were from this research process that you thought about that you really wanted to pull into your character.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from the research that I'd done, and yeah, like you said, I read a lot of autobiographies of particular people who I'd read about that had been abducted, that had survived an abduction, you know, and so you get sort of first-hand information of what happened. But some of the more sort of interesting dynamics were the people who, you know, whole towns that had been affected by the story of an abduction. And I read as well that it happened a lot in smaller towns. You know, people wouldn't do it so much in big cities. It was much more you would drive out to these small towns and you would take somebody and, you know, and so, yeah, there were some heartbreaking reports of people who had been in the room when it had happened, you know, where, you know, a sister who shared a bedroom with her sister had been in the room and seen somebody come into the room and take their sister, and, you know, various family members, that how it affected them, you know, and what it was like to kind of carry on living life, not knowing what had happened to your sibling or your best friend, you know, and the unresolved pain of just not knowing what happened, you know, I think is runs very deep, you know.
Well, one of the things that also plays into the relationship as a dad on screen that was interesting to me as well was that obviously each kid is, you know, he's got 3 children and each of them are very different and have very different needs, and he's got different relationships, and you know, did you sit with the younger cast and kind of work with them to figure out what that dynamic was going to be, or was it really just like the preparation that went into thinking about it based on their different personalities and the way that they shone through in the scripts?
Yeah, I mean, there was no preparation into that stuff at all, or any conversations whatsoever. It was all just sort of organic, and you know, it sort of played itself out as really as it could. Yeah, and I sort of understood very, very quickly that sort of each child. I mean, they're not my, you know, but like Kylie Rogers, who plays my teenage daughter, and then Brooklyn, and then Mila, who plays 4 or 5 years old. You know, that they, even just as people, you know, off the set, they all required something very, very different, you know, and it was a different relationship and a very different dynamic that you had with each individual, you know. And so that, you know, informed a lot when it came to sort of pretending to be their dad, you know, and just the way you talk with a teenage girl compared to how you talk to a 4-year-old, and of course everybody's personalities are different. So yeah, it was a real learning curve for me. You know, I don't have any kids, you know, so it was a really fun and exciting and eye-opening experience to suddenly be given three daughters to kind of manage, you know. But I loved that they all required something different, and I really understood, even just from spending time with Matt Lysiak, who the real character is based on, you know, that he has a very strong and very special relationship with all of his daughters, you know. But of course, Hildy, his middle child, is such a sort of mirror image, such a reflection of himself, that there is just that extra dynamic, and she shares all the same passions and sort of perspectives on life as he does, you know. So yeah, it was really interesting to sort of observe that and be around that.
Yeah, and in getting to meet with him, and I know that Brooklyn also got to spend time with him and with Hildy as well, what were some of the really useful moments out of those conversations and just seeing their dynamic together, especially because, you know, the way that he parents her is so beautiful and special. He never tries to diminish her ambition or what she wants to do for herself. He really just encourages it. And I heard that he used to take her to crime scene investigations as well.
Yeah. There's an amazing sort of like, he had such a progressive way of sort of being a parent, even though I'm kind of like, really? You did that? That's amazing. Wow. But yeah, I think for me in Brooklyn, it was the times where we weren't with, it was the times when we could sort of observe them from afar, which sounds a little bit creepy, but, you know, it's just nice to sort of watch them when they don't know that you're watching them, you know. And we were able to sort of do that at the read-through when they sort of came to visit us, and we all spent the day together. And it was just really nice when you could sort of see them from the other side of the room, and you would just see them talking and laughing, and or sort of getting annoyed with each other, and him telling her off or her telling him off, vice versa. You know, it was just those little details that you could just sort of watch from afar and kind of go, okay, I can sort of see how these two sort of interact with each other, and how sort of, you know, layered it is with any relationship, you know, but with theirs specifically, yeah.
Yeah, and with that idea of observing people just from afar or when they're not noticing it, I was curious about your thought process with his work as an investigative journalist and how that really just plays into every single interaction, you know, from the moment he steps back into his town and the curiosity in which he has with everything around him, and how that really helped you to form your character.
Yeah, it was interesting because, yeah, at the time of the story, he sort of closed that chapter in his life. He's sort of, you know, he's lost his job as an investigative journalist, and I think lost a lot of passion for being a journalist. And it's just seeing his daughter have that hunger and that drive and that absolute need to sort of find the truth in everything that she sees. And I think it just slowly kind of gets back into his bones and back into, you know, it just fuels his sort of need, because he knows that he's the same, you know, and it's really inspiring to see a young girl kind of inspire that back into an adult again, you know, and that she's sort of teaching him how to sort of get through this emotional trauma, and that she's kind of almost sort of leading the way in that regard. You know, she can see that her dad needs some help, and she sort of steps in and really kind of encourages him and gets him back on his feet again, really. And I love that about it. But yeah, it was meeting with Matt as well, with just to go back to talking to the real Matt Lysiak, it was whenever I tried to speak to him or whenever I tried to talk to him and get information about his life and who he is and what it's like to be a journalist, he instantly just turned it back on me and was asking me more questions than I could ask him. And it became an interview about me, you know, and I was like, no, I'm trying to learn about you. And then I could just see it's just in his bones and in his instinct is just to ask questions, you know, not answer them, but ask them, you know. So, yeah, that was quite a nice thing to sort of latch onto, that he is just so inquisitive and so smart as well, and just so sort of open to all different kinds of ideas. So it was good spending time with him.
Yeah, and you know, with that idea that, you know, Hildy's really the central character that he's learning from, what do you kind of ultimately hope that audiences take away in terms of really listening to voices and understanding that next generation has a lot to say that we may not always be aware of?
Yeah, I do. I think it's so nice to sort of understand that young people have a very clear look at the world sometimes, but often more clearer and more precise, without any of the sort of chaos around it. There's just a very sort of, I don't want to use the word innocent, but just very sort of untainted view of the world, you know, and that it is really important to sort of see the world through a young person's eyes. And sort of, you know, sometimes when they just say something or their perception of something is so sort of I can't think of the word, and I don't want to use the word black and white either, but I guess it is. It's just so sort of specific that you can see the world for what it is, you know. And I think the show really touches on that really well. I think it doesn't look down on kids at all. It doesn't sort of patronize the kids. It shows them as being really fun and really playful, and that you know that the adventure of being a child is very present in the show, I think. But you know, that their emotions are as real as any adult's emotions, and their perception of things is as important as any adult's, you know. And I think, you know, the times that we're living in now, that's becoming more and more apparent with these big global issues, climate change being at the forefront of all of that. When you look at a child's perception of climate change, it makes our behavior look ridiculous. Do you know what I mean? And you know, when you see it like that, and you see how clear they can sort of see the problems, it takes your breath away, you know, and it really kind of makes you question a huge amount of our own adult behavior, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And those themes definitely come through in the show. And I want to thank you so much. And I really hope that you're able to get back to season 2 at some point fairly soon. I know we all want to know what's going to happen next as well. We're all just as desperate to find out what's going on. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks, Mara. Appreciate it.